Hey, Mike Amundsen here, coming back at you again with more from my Design and Build Great Web APIs book that I'm writing for Pragmatic Publishers. Wanted to talk about the way I'm using Postman to test, and it's specifically how I'm automating Postman tests from the command line using a great utility called Newman. So I thought we'd take a little look at that here. We'll come over here to the command line side. Now, I think I showed this a little bit before in a previous screencast, but just to kind of go over, this is the test node that I keep in my NPM project. So you'll actually see I've got a little bit here, this SRTs. We talked about SRTs in another screencast. This is the simple request testing. This is just probes using curl with post and put and patch and delete and stuff like that. Postman is a much more sophisticated way to do testing. I can actually test behavior. I can use BDD style expect and look for both happy and sad path informations, check individual values, not just the simple response. So that's what we're going to talk about here. And then I'll be using Newman. We'll show Newman a little bit later, but I want to sort of get you the idea of how this works the very first time. So let me go ahead and do this, clean this up here. And then what I'm going to do is build me another window here. And from this angle, I want to go ahead and do my NPM run. Talked about this before. I use NPM scripting, and this actually runs a sort of a developer version, a monitored version of a node, so I can kind of watch it. So when I go up in here and build this out here, then now I'm in my Postman space here, and I can just take a quick look at all the stuff I've got here. So the postman.data script actually pulls environment and collection information. We're going to skip that today. The env holds my API key. I'm going to need that because I'm making API calls. And then we're going to take a look at the configuration. We're going to run this a few times and then look at some of the output as well. So just to go ahead and make this a little bit easier, let's just do a little check here on the configuration file. Configuration is pretty easy. I've got a title, and then I've got Postman collection information. So that's my collection ID and then my environment IDs. I usually keep 2 environments for every collection. That's the environment for running locally on my workstation and an environment running remotely on a deployed staging server or some other place. In my case, that's Heroku. These test file and env files are just local files that I pull information from the API and then store them locally. It's no big deal. So that's my configuration. So what is this going to look like in real life? I've got my API running on another platform. So all I really need to do is do my little test run. Now, remember I said before, I need to say whether I'm going to run it locally or remotely. In this case, I'm running locally. That'll pick the right environment for the tests. Fire this sucker up and then walk through the process. You can see it actually goes through all of my tests. You can see it hitting the API in the lower end and getting the results in the top. Now, it's a little bit hard. Things go by pretty quick. I like this little summary at the end. Tells me exactly how many iterations and requests and all these other things. So 163 assertions, they all seem to go really well. So that's fine, but I can't really see the detail because it kind of scrolls beyond it. So instead, what I like to do is add a little bit of something to my configuration, which I can do, and that's to create an output file. So we'll call test output.txt, right? So then we can save that. Now what's going to happen is when I run this again, it's actually going to output all of that information into that file that I can watch later. So we're going to do the same thing, run it, check all of it. You're going to notice it's going to go run through the APIs and then save that test output. So then I can go ahead and check that output again. This time, there'll be a new file called test output. And this tells me everything that I've got in there. So this is actually pretty close to everything I had before. So this is my Newman run. This is the name of the test set. And these things called happy paths, which I talked about earlier. These are the tests that I expect to return 200. So I can check status and headers. I can actually test the body of the message, make sure it has the right elements in it. And I can even test the value of the bodies as well to make sure that they contain certain values. So this is how I do my testing. I also, along with the happy path, have this thing called sad path testing. So sad path testing is really my ability to test for things that should return 400. For instance, that's a bad ID, so it returns 400. Here I'm just deleting some working records, and then I can't create a record if it's missing vital fields. So that is testing as well. And then finally, I can go ahead and still see the same summary that I was looking at before. Now this is great. I put this off on the disk, and often I put this output into my repo and I kind of commit it as the last test run. But it's not really the best way to take a look at this. So there's another way to take a look at this, and that's actually a nice HTML page. So what I'm going to do here is actually, let's fire this up here, and we'll go over here and look at an HTML output from this same routine. So this is actually a really nice, clean HTML report. It has the same kind of information that they were looking at before, but it's easily formatted. You can make it part of your website. It expands to all of the tests that I run, and even gives me all of the details. So the response information for each one, what I headers I had, what responses I have, the actual body itself, any other additional information about the test itself as to what passed and what didn't. So it's a really, really nice report. I really like that a lot. And that basically comes as part of that Newman setup. So let's go back and take a little bit more look at this script that I'm using to run it. And that's actually the test run script. So the test run script is just a bash script. It's got a couple of things. It makes a few assumptions. It assumes that the API is up and running somewhere, and assumes that I've installed this Newman utility, npm Newman. You can look it up in npm, along with that HTML extra. That's the HTML viewer you'll need to install. And I use curl to actually do the API calls. So I load my key, load my configuration information, and then do the first big work, which is actually pulling the collection and environment variables out of Postman using their API. So you can see I'm passing my API key, doing all that work there. Once I've got that information, I've got the test set and the environment, I can actually use this utility called Newman run, using that file and its environment, and certain reporters. So it depends on whether or not I'm using a pipe to the output. So those are the two things that you see here. But otherwise, that's really all there is to it. It's a fantastic suite. It's a fantastic set. And what this will allow me to do is actually automate quite a bit of testing. So I usually do this when I'm about to commit into the repo. I'll run this set of tests. I usually use SRTs as I'm actually building to make sure that it's sort of like my bench test. And this is something that I'll do towards the end. So this will also come in handy later, because this is actually something that we'll use as part of my sort of mini CI/CD plan that'll let me go ahead and run tests, deploy if the tests pass, and then actually run the remote tests again if I need to. So that's really it. That's the idea of Postman, and doing it from the command line using a tool called Newman, which I think is a really, really cool setup, a really cool tool. So hopefully that makes sense, and we'll cover this in another time. Keep an eye on the bug up at the top of the screen. You should be able to click on that, get more information. You can download this script and other things that are related to the book, and I hope I see you again next time.